Well, good Friday morning, everyone. Today is Friday, May the 29th, 2015, and we have WX Live webinar number 151 with Jeff Graham. He's going to be presenting a WinDev report using table break calculations in a separate thread. Sounds like an interesting topic. It's all yours, Jeff.
Good morning, everyone. We're having problems with the screen sharing, so I hope you can see it. It may flicken back and forth as questions are asked. But let me give you a little history on this report. This is the window that calls the report. But I have a client that does manufacturing, ISO certified, and does a lot of stuff for aircraft manufacturing. And they wanted to figure out, and they make parts for aircraft manufacturers. So they needed more detailed information on the cost of those parts. And they wanted a cost history where they could go back and look at what the costs were at a given date range. And the data comes from SQL Server tables that are part of their manufacturing software called visual manufacturing. So in this application, there are a lot of SQL Server tables, and we don't have the native drivers, so we don't get all of the advantages of it, but we needed to pick up data out of multiple SQL Server tables. Primary ones are the part and inventory transaction tables here, and the selection criterias are part ID and the transaction date. These are the primary ones. But they also can pick it from other parameters. We'll go through that in a minute here. But the interesting thing is this is just a standard join that you would expect on one field. However, when you get to certain inventory transactions include a work order, but not all of them. So we had to have an outer join based on the part ID, and this has multiple fields that have to match to make the join. Makes it a little more complicated, and you have to manually enter these relationships there. And then on some transaction, there's a customer order line where it is actually fulfilling a customer order. So you have another outer join based on the part when it meets a customer order line. Now we'll just briefly look at the SQL for this, and I think you can see that text. And in there are some calculated fields which are used to determine profit margins and loss and that sort of thing. So it's a fairly convoluted SQL statement from my viewpoint, maybe not for you SQL wizards. And under the selections, well, let's look at the query description real quick. And I've got it, you probably can't see that. Is that readable? I hope so. Okay. And this is the data out of the fields. And then since there are multiple fields containing cost information, I added a calculated field to sum the cost. And then we have 3 more calculated fields, and all that does is just simply add those 4 fields in one convenient field of access. Then in the profit percentage, and I don't know if I can get this text yeah, but it's not. Okay. What it does is basically add those costs up and returns a percentage, profit percentage. And then this is the quantity times price for the transaction, which is simply taking the quantity times the price. And then there was a loss field. That's not, that was a historical thing more than it just, then it has a condition on that field. All right, so it has selection parameters there. That's just the one query in this report. Now, if there's a work order, then the report has to go out and find all the labor tickets related to that work order so it can calculate the runtime on the machine and the setup time, which is part of the report. And that'll be a little more meaningful when you look at it. Now, before we started today, I went over and ran this report for an entire last year with no selection criteria. So there were 16,630 inventory transactions. And for this demonstration, I put in the times or the duration for the queries and updating the table, which we'll go through how that works in just a minute. But you can see the query was 245 milliseconds, but updating the totals, where it has to go out and get the setup and the runtime, which you see over here, that took an hour and 24 minutes this morning. So let's go back to the report. Now, any questions about the queries or whatever, just let me know or let Tim know, and
Yeah.
he'll
Nothing
okay.
yet.
Now, this is the query form where they specify how they want to run the report. Pretty straightforward. They can select particular part IDs, date range, or what kind of product it is, and commodity, and so forth. Everything above this line that you see here drives the query. And then they click on the button, and that generates the table below. And then everything down here is how you filter the data in this table for your reporting. So you can select certain profit ranges and or other criteria. And then this is selecting how you want to view it. It's faster if you go straight to a PDF and it'll open the PDF. Or you can preview it, which is the standard way that we do a lot of reports. So let's just run a quick test on this and you'll see kind of how it works. Now this is that's 2 months worth of data, and I'm going to limit it to one of their customers. And what they do by convention is they make parts for specific customers, and they also make generic parts. So if they're making parts and inventorying parts for a specific customer, they by convention put the part ID in a user-defined field for the part. So if this is how they select by a particular customer. Now when you click on the generate table, now let's open this up a little bit more. When you click on generate, that starts the query, and the query will fill in the table, and then it goes through and now it's going through the table and looping through and updating these fields. It has to update the runtime, the setup time, the run time, and then all these break totals. What complicated it was that they wanted to have totals by the type of inventory transaction, whether it was an issue or a um, whether it's going into inventory or it's coming out of inventory. When it takes it out of inventory, it's usually filling a customer order line where it has all the price information. So if we go back to the test here, then now it's complete. And the query time was, 272 milliseconds, and it took 2 seconds and 760 milliseconds to update the table, which is fine. Now, one of the interesting things, and now when we do the report, I've put in some parameters that said I want to only see losses in small profits. So it limits the report. And you can see that there's 6 pages of this. I know you can't read that, so let's make it large. So here are the inventory transaction types. Now this one has a work order, so it has runtime and setup time in that transaction line. And then here are the totals by type R and type I. And so the type I, which is the issue, has prices, average price, and then this is where the average margin is, which we're selecting on. And you can see it's only the minus ones and those less than 5%. So maybe you want to narrow it down some more. So we're excluding zero. Zero comes out when they're taking some parts that are just generic parts. So we exclude those. Now, if we clear this field, oops, I'm sorry about, I hit the enter, not the backspace, and this field. And we uncheck this. And then we can print again now without regenerating the table. So you can look at different aspects of this particular date range that you picked in query conditions. Now you can see that it's now having get that. It's all right. Now there's 19 pages where there were 10. In your there's some here that have 0. That's why we were excluding those before. Now, if you make a change here, now you notice that you can't print the report anymore because we changed the query condition and that is not in the table yet. So any of these fields modified up here basically cancels the generation. Let's make it a longer period. I'll show you. Now if you start generating the table, and since it takes a long time to do it, if you come up here and say, oh, that's not what I wanted July 1st. Now it canceled the generation and enabled the generate button again. So that if you change anything up here, it wants to verify, make sure that what's in the table corresponds to that and not let you forget to generate the table. So now we generate, and that's basically the same information. And it's still updating the table. And it takes this long because on every row that has a work order, you have to go out and get another, do another query for each of those lines and total up the runtime and set time labor tickets. Now it's ready, and you can print the report. And if we select this, it'll only give us negative entries, and we still have the zeros. And then if we exclude zeros, and it narrows it down more. It takes a while for the preview. Now it's only 5 pages. And you can go through and review the detail, and if you want to narrow it down some more, you can just by reprinting the report. So how does all this work? Oh, I had to stop in there. Okay, we have ended the test now. So when you press the Generate Table button, and let me back up a second. If you do the previously, in one version of this report, if you printed or clicked on the Generate or the Report button, then there was no Generate and Print buttons, then it would start this run process. And if they did large date ranges, they could not use their application while that was running. And so it was simple to fix that. We made the Generate button, and it clears the table and cancels out the primary query, and then does goes through all the parameters and specifies the query parameters. And this is the old code. We come down to, oh, it's before here. Then it does a thread execute for this update part ID totals. So we go look at that. So now it starts a thread which goes in there and executes the query. The parameters have been set up in the button code, and then this is where we do the time difference to show that on the screen, how long the query took versus how long the processing. If it doesn't find anything in the query, then you just get a message and it returns. Then we display that data and sort it, and then we start the update process. So then we just loop through, and if there's a part ID, we total the information about the part ID, the R types and the I types. And if there's a, and this is more just the total updates, but then we get down to if there's a work order, then we have to go out and execute another query to get and loop through and pick up all the run times and the setup time labor tickets and put them in the row that is required, because they wanted to know, be able to look and see why a particular cost is high or low. And part of it could be that they were having problems running the part. And then when it's finished, it puts out the message, data table complete, and since it could be running in the background, it moves this window to above any other thing that's going on in beeps. I probably can't hear the beep normally, but it's processing. So let's just kind of view how that works. So we'll run it in the original type test. And you may remember this from the query webinar I did, if you saw that one. Now, the cost history report is here, and we'll take this criteria off. That'll make a little longer report. So then we start the generation, and now it's got 2,000 records. Now you can go ahead and do a search. You can use the application for other things, contacts, and go on. And it's going to take a while to complete that. So let's cancel this one, and we'll put the customer code back, because we don't want it to take that long for our demonstration. We do another generate, but we go over here and continue looking at whatever we were doing, and in the background it's processing here. Jackson, and we can even go do another search. And this is a nice thing. Now, when it completed, you heard the beep probably, and it put it on top of the other fields. So now you're ready to print without having to constantly check it. And if you do let's show the difference here. It took 2 minutes and, or 2 minutes and, or a minute, 2 seconds it says. Okay. It's much faster if you just go directly to a PDF and open the PDF than doing the preview, which is interesting. And show the difference. But then the preview gives you more options. So and now it's ready to do another query or additional reports. So it solved the problems they were having in trying to do these large data analysis. And the owner of the company does these analysis all the time. And some of the reports he'd run would go for hours in the initial version. And this has cut it down to where you can do all the data for a year in an hour and let's see here, hour 24 minutes. I've got this wrong. It's actually, that's the hours, minutes, seconds, or milliseconds. So it's an hour and 24 minutes for this to run. I ran this before the webinar started. And I actually did some tests. Let's see if I can see the results here. If you run in test mode, the times were very long, hour 24 minutes, and then 34 minutes for if you're running installed. I never actually compared that before. And then so I tried, well, what's the difference between running 32-bit and 64-bit on a 64-bit machine? And the times are very close to the same, which was interesting. So Just move that out of the way. So that is basically how we solved the problem with long runtimes. When we were actually trying to do this just as a report, it would run out of memory frequently and just crash the machine. By changing it to do it in a table, we never had that problem again, and then just reporting from the table. But trying to do all these calculations and running a query within the report to get the runtime and setup time, it would frequently run out of memory, or it would give unreliable results. So this was a much better way. And by first cut, we tried putting the second query and the totaling in the row display of the table. That did not work well either. So making it into two steps of displaying the table, then looping through the table and doing whatever calculations needed, made it stable, and you could put it in a thread, and processing was faster and more reliable. So that's basically all I have for today, unless there's any questions on how this works. It's just an example of some of the neat things you can do with WinDev if you run into a thing, unusual situation. A lot of flexibility and a lot that you can do. Any questions?
I don't see any questions out here. We have a few presenters here on the webinar this morning. Glenn, do you have anything you need to say? Or Jerome? Well, I'll make a quick announcement. The sale on upgrades ends in just a couple of days. So if you still haven't purchased your version 20 upgrade, now's the time to do it. And in the UK, you could see Wolfgang. In the US, you could see myself, WinDev-US. Or the rest of the world, you can see Jerome, who is on the webinar right now as well. So, anybody else?
Not really. That was a good presentation. Very insightful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And if any questions come up later, you can always contact me.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeff, for doing it. It was a valuable experience. Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll stop the broadcast.